Greetings. I have a bit of a shorter one for you today, but keeping in the spirit of the hype train, as I mentioned yesterday, I just want to keep the videos rolling. So we're going to go over all of the trigger spells that we know that are confirmed going to be in PoE 2. Just for clarification on that classification, that just means any skill that said cast and then like on or while, I threw that in this video. You'll notice a theme with all of these skill gems is that they have these persistent trigger and meta tags. I think that is also a good criteria to define a trigger skill. So you'll notice that those tags are here and present and accounted for on every single one of these videos, or on every single one of these skill gems. Without further ado, let's get into them. There's not as big of a list to go over, but these are the, I believe, 8 trigger skills that I'm excited for in PoE 2. In no particular order. I guess it's alphabetical, actually. That's the particular order. We have, starting off, this is a classic. It's Cast on Critical Strike, or Cast on Crit. As you see, the trigger skills will now be reserving spirit instead of mana, or rather, they will reserve something instead of just add a mana cost multiplier to whatever it is that you're doing. That's one big change from the trigger skills that we knew of in PoE 1. In PoE 1, if you had a trigger skill, or if you were trying to do anything with like cast on crit, cast on stun, cast on anything, the trigger skill, cast on damage taken, the trigger skill would use your mana, and it would be in proportion to the mana cost of the skill it was triggering with a multiplier associated with it. Now it looks like instead of costing mana, it's just going to reserve spirit and then accumulate energy over time. Energy is a new mechanic that looks like it will be the determiner for how often the trigger or how frequent the spell gets cast. So you have a trigger spell associated with a spell in your arsenal, and while you are reserving that spirit, over time you're gaining energy, which happens when the condition is met. So in this case, when you're critting, you're gaining energy over time, and you will eventually payload that energy into one instance of triggering the spell when you reach maximum. Here's the numbers. You gain 10 energy when you deal a crit. I don't know the energy threshold for triggering that spell instance. It might be 100. It might be a number that's variable, meaning something that you can change with stats. That'd be really cool. If you could get like real nitty gritty. You can kind of do this in PoE 1 with server tick refresh rate and cooldown recovery rate. We have it down to a fine science of knowing that you can get about 10 spell casts, I believe, every second being cast with trigger spells. So really just interesting to see how this energy mechanic plays out. And that's that on Cast on Crit and the energy mechanic. We're going to go on to Cast on Freeze. This is a new condition for the trigger spells that we haven't seen before. There's never been a cast on freeze. And you'll see as we get further into this list, the conditions get even more specific, or equally as specific, we'll say. This is also going to be persistent trigger meta spell, as we established. It's only going to reserve 60 spirit, so just note that, you know, it's a more specific condition, and perhaps for that reason, they made the overall energy that you need to generate and the overall amount of spirit that you need to reserve less as sort of a like compensation. Like, hey, it's a harder trigger to meet, so maybe you're going to have an easier time meeting it. Might kind of be the logic there. I'm not entirely sure, but as you do see, 26% increased energy generated from this particular instance of the skill gem, and like I said, only a 60 spirit cost for the reservation. Says gain 100 energy when you freeze an enemy with a hit from a skill once per skill use, trigger all socketed spells, and lose all energy on reaching maximum energy. Has 10 max energy per 1.13 seconds of base cast time of socketed spells. That's very interesting. So it actually determines the maximum energy of its own trigger based on the skill that you socket it to. That's so interesting. Man, it's the modularity. It's insane. I'm already saying, and I assume that it works this way for this skill as well. This is more, I really like to see this, that the energy cost of the payload is based on the skill it's triggering itself. It means they have so much more control, especially over the balance of a lot of these trigger type skills. Oh, God, this must be a nightmare to code. I want to contain my excitement. I'm really excited to see where they're going with the direction of these trigger spells. Overall, based on the wording of just this cast on freeze text, because this line right here tells me that they're going even more modular than they had it in PoE 1, which is so crazy to think about how much more control they're trying to put into the hands of the player and then also into the hands of their ability to balance the game. So really freaking hyped for this. I can't wait to see more. We got cast on Ignite. Similar spirit reservation cost to our cast on freeze, as you see. Both require 60. This does give you only 20 energy when you ignite an ability, or when you ignite an enemy from a skill. I assume this is because freezing an enemy will be, you know, naturally more difficult to do than igniting an enemy. Usually in PoE 1, if you didn't know, and maybe it'll work this way in PoE 2, to freeze an enemy, you kind of have to build up to a very big chill. You don't have to. You could also just crit them really hard with cold damage. But it generally works in that way, where freeze something up to 30% and then you do a little bit more damage, and then you hit a threshold where eventually you'll hit like, I think it's around 10% of their max HP is what's necessary for you to start freezing them if you're gonna crit hit them with cold damage. I think it's pretty specific, but just know that freezing things is definitely more difficult to do, generally speaking, if we're just talking about damage and the threshold for it, than igniting things. So it'd make more sense that it's easier to ignite things and therefore you should gain less energy from them. But this just looks like a payload for if you're igniting a bunch of things and you want to trigger a spell. So it doesn't exist in PoE 1. Really excited to see how it's used in PoE 2. We've got cast on melee kill, and just a quick note about this skill gem, and I'm glad that they throw this in there. There is a type skill gem of this nature in PoE 1. They do throw this up right here to kind of demonstrate that. So we'll read the newer one first. Cast on melee kill reserves 50 spirit, not 60, not 100, and gains 30 energy when you kill an enemy with a melee hit. Triggers all socketed spells and loses all energy on reaching max energy. And this is an interesting deviation from the other triggers. It has 10 max energy per 1.1 second of base cast time. As you see, this is what I was talking about earlier, where I'm so excited for the modularity of the control that they're doing with all of these trigger spell gems. Because this rate of 10 max energy per 0.1 second of base cast time, that is a different rate than the ignite and freeze. Probably because melee spells or skills says triggers all socketed spells. So melee spells and melee skill gems in general probably have a shorter cast time in general. I don't know if that's the reason for the rate, but either way, socketed skills deal 50% more damage. That's insane that the game is rewarding you with more damage for triggering a skill gem. I guess it's only for the melee one that we've seen so far, but even still, 50% more damage. Usually this is a less damage multiplier on these socketed skills. So, hey, if you're a melee killer and you want to have socketed melee ripostes or like parries or some crap, rejoice, you're gonna get damage multipliers for that. Kind of bonkers. They're really trying to push this playstyle of like some melee samurai swordsman goes in there, kills something, and then you activate the Bushido, and then just fling out like a bunch of different sword spells. I don't know. I'm really excited to see where this goes. I feel like I keep saying that on repeat, but they've never tried giving you a damage multiplier, especially not this much before. It seems like if we look at the PoE 1 skill gem, supported spells have 39% more spell damage, but this is just any melee skill that you attach to the thing that you're using to kill things with is going to do 50% more damage when you kill something with its trigger, if that makes sense. So rejoice, you know, as long as you're able to kill things with your main skill, your secondary skill, the socketed one, is going to do 50% more damage. I guess that is one like weird element to this, is you need to actually be getting melee kills with the thing that you're triggering this spell with. So maybe, I don't know if you can like summon your own minions and then kill those reliably, but it would stand to reason to me that the skill that you're using to trigger skills with, that's often not your main skill, that's your trigger skill. And so you don't usually want to invest super hard into that thing doing damage. And so you're going to have to make that do damage if you want to use the cast on melee kill, because the condition is that you kill things in melee range. So unless you can summon worms like you can in PoE 1 with a flask, it's going to be interesting to see how people use this. But again, just really hyped for this damage payload, because that's insane. That's a huge number, 50% more damage. Then next we have cast on melee stun. This is familiar from its PoE 1 counterpart. Sad to see no PoE 1 variant of the skill gem, but we'll just read over it. You got a 50 reservation spirit cost, a 1 second cooldown timer for, I assume, whatever triggering spell happens. So in addition to this is, and this was consistent across all of these other skill gems. No, it was is definitely consistent with the melee kill one, not the ignite or freeze one, but there is an internal cooldown of 1 second for the melee kill and the melee stun triggered spell. So just keep that in mind. In addition to this, to the energy, you got the energy funnel, and then you have the inherent cooldown timer of the gem itself as a funnel for, you know, how many casts of a trigger, of a certain trigger can you get per second. But the rates for this one are 10 energy per enemy power when you heavily stun an enemy with a melee hit. So keep this in mind. I was kind of talking about this in the last video with the like designation of certain skills as a role. We saw this with like the detonator skills in my last minion skill video. They're gonna have different stun classifications, like heavy stun, regular stun, detonator, non-detonator. I don't know. They're gonna have their own classifications for how skills do things, and that will encompass melee skills. There will be melee skills that heavily stun enemies. There will be magic spells or, you know, ranged spells that heavily stun things. So you're going to need something that will heavily stun something if you want to gain this 10 energy power payload for the cast on melee stun ability. Otherwise, if you're only doing regular little puny stuns, you're going to get 2 energy. And that's only on melee hits, as the name implies. Then once you gain the energy that's necessary to pop the payload, obviously it's just going to trigger the spell, and you're going to lose all the energy just like with every other spell. And the rate for how much energy you're going to need is 0.1 seconds of base cast time times the ability itself times 10, right? Because the rate is 10 energy per 0.1 seconds. Anyways, then we have cast on minion death. I actually talked about this in the last video, but we'll cover it again because it's in the theme of this video as well. This is a new trigger spell that will exist for minion deaths. And what's really interesting about this is this has existed in a form in certain uniques in PoE 1 and has led to some very creative and unique builds propping up where like you summon a minion that, or a minion summons automatically due to some gear that you have or some weird mechanic you have in your build, and then usually dies, and then that death triggers like an explosion or triggers some kind of chain reaction from more summoning, and then your build just runs around with that interaction going on, killing everything. They are now making that a skill gem, so we can have that kind of crazy interaction hopefully happen for every build or for more builds, and not just very unique niche builds that take advantage of very specific uniques and like very weird account builds. So I'm very interested to see how this gets used, as I talked about previously in that video. But either way, the reservation cost for spirit is 30 on this one, and you will gain energy when your minions are dying, which also takes spirit to reserve. So this is not like an archetype that I assume you're going to just be able to flex into. It's going to reserve a lot of spirit. Just in general, all of these cast on X reserve spirits or have a reserve spirit cost associated with them. So it's going to be something you're definitely going to like have to think about with your build. It's not free, but I'm really excited to see where players screw on with these things, especially since I've seen pretty low level requirements for a good chunk of these. I guess Cast and Ignite is level 58, Freeze is 58, Crit is 58, but there's no level requirement for the Cast while Channeling gem. I don't know if that's just missing. Cast on Shock is level 1, Cast on Minion Death is level 10, as we talked about yesterday. So without any other things I feel like I need to say, that's been all of the trigger gems. Like, subscribe if you appreciate it. We're going to be doing more of these as I talked about. And yeah, there you go.